There we go. Okay. So, Aaron asks to start because hopefully you guys read or watched The People versus Larry Flynt. Again, if you did have power issues and were not able to get it done and you would like to get it done like today or tomorrow, let me know. I don't usually like to do that, but with everything that went on with everybody's power and dealing with that whole nightmare, I am going to be a little bit more flexible. But anyway, somebody asked if I could explain just briefly the case between Flynt and Falwell, and it's pretty interesting. So Jerry Falwell alleged, and does everybody know who Jerry Falwell is? I'm not sure if everybody watched the movie because you didn't have to, so there might be some people who didn't. But Jerry Falwell was, I believe he started Liberty University. I get Liberty and Oral Roberts mixed up, but I'm pretty sure it was Liberty University. He's a Southern evangelical Christian, and Larry Flynt did in Hustler, because Hustler was more than just dirty pictures. It was also kind of cartoons and satirizations. Larry Flynt and Hustler kind of wrote a fake advertisement where Jerry Falwell talked about his first gay experience. Now, Jerry Falwell obviously did not write in Hustler magazine about his first gay experience. It was a satirization. It was something that was made up. Excuse me. And so when Jerry Falwell sued, saying, look, I didn't have a gay experience. I didn't write this. This is false. This is defamation, right? The district court, the first court that looks at a case, found that it wasn't defamation because nobody could reasonably believe that Hustler was making an accusation of fact, right? Anybody with even a modicum of self-awareness and common sense would read that and say, oh, they're making fun of him. It's kind of like watching SNL and thinking, when you see Will Ferrell do George Bush or you see Kate McKinnon do Hillary Clinton, you don't sit there and think, oh my God, Hillary Clinton's on SNL or George Bush is on SNL. Like, how crazy is that? Like, it's obviously they're making fun of this person by pretending to be them. And that was what it was here. So they threw it out and said, no, it's not defamation because it's more of an opinion. It's a satirization. It's not accusation of fact that can be proven true or false. So it was gone, right? And so it's not, however, Falwell also sued under what's called intentional infliction of emotional distress. We actually don't cover that in this class just because it's a little bit outside the scope. But essentially what it is when you are so awful to somebody that you knowingly inflict on them psychological damage. So a good example is pretty similar, actually, to what the Westboro Baptist Church does. Now, they were held to be non-liable because it was as a matter of public concern, which actually, well, I'll get to in a second, but, you know, it's like if somebody loses their child, right, and you go, and somebody goes up to them and just starts making fun of the fact that they just lost their kid. Everybody in society that's not a monster is going to go, what the heck is wrong with you? That's awful. And it also might cause that person psychological damage. So you're going to compensate them for. That was almost really bad. I do apologize. Okay, I'm going to move this so I can stop looking like an idiot. We're going to go back and forth. Okay, so that is what Jerry Falwell sued on. And the district court said, yeah, Hustler, you know, this guy is a fundamental evangelical Christian. Saying that he had a gay experience is probably one of the worst things you could say about that person. Now, from a societal standpoint, that's probably not the most progressive stance to take, right? That the worst thing you could say about somebody is that they were in they had a same-sex experience. But it's certainly going to cause that person emotional distress. And so they found in favor of Jerry Falwell. In the Supreme Court said, no, if nobody's going to believe it's not true, and you're a public figure, and it's intended to satirize a public figure, that's constitutionally protected speech. and therefore it cannot be held liable. So really what the Supreme Court did in the Larry Flynt case was kind of hand down a rule that it's almost impossible to intentionally inflict emotional distress on a public figure. Because when you're a public figure, you better have some darn thick skin when you go out into the public. Now, if somebody says something false about you and you know that it's false, then you can sue them. You can sue them under defamation. Just because it's difficult to sue as a public figure does not mean it's impossible. But if somebody's being outrageous or somebody's being true and your feelings are hurt, get out of the public eye. Jerry Falwell became a very well-known and very rich person by being Jerry Falwell. Liberty University is very, very nice. His son just got fired from Liberty University because he was partying too much on a private yacht. He enjoys the benefits of being in the public eye. You don't get to have the same thin skin as everybody else. Now, that is the law. Does that mean you should go out and cyberbully whoever you want on Twitter? Okay, probably not. But constitutionally, if they try and sue you and say this person was mean to me on Twitter, chances are you're probably fine. Aaron, does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Sure. All right, good. So I'm going to spend a lot of time on this particular slide, actually. We've covered it very briefly at the end of class last time, but it is going to be a really, really, really important thing because it is one of the, without this characterization, without this stratification of public figures, public officials, limited purpose public official or figures, and private individuals, what you can say and the certainty with which you as a journalist or a filmmaker or whoever else to move forward with a story alters drastically, as we'll see with Rolling Stone. So public officials is going to be a lot of people. There's an understanding in this country that when we vote for individuals, when we elect people or people are appointed, that not only are their public positions relevant, but also their moral character. Think about all of the people who just vote on personal conscience or like, I like that person. George Bush's big thing in 2004 is that, well, I could go have a beer with George Bush. Couldn't have a beer with John Kerry, right? That's why we care so much about celebrity or political sex scandals. Because if somebody is, in the voter's opinion, lacking moral character, then they do not have the moral fitness to lead. Or at least that is a rational way in which people choose their leaders. I mean, I think that we can all agree on that, right? Because you can look at polling on issues and then support for candidates, those are not necessarily aligned, and oftentimes they're diametrically opposed. So, because voters and a democratic populace can take every aspect of a person's life and use it to determine their fitness for office, the Supreme Court has held that every aspect of their office, it's important to be able to debate every aspect of their life without fear of an overzealous court exacting political retribution via lax libel laws, which is kind of what you saw with Lance Armstrong. They were right, and they were proven to be right, and they still owed Lance Armstrong $2 million. And the approach is, we would rather false things get said and then to be corrected by the people that was said that were falsely accused of something, than allow those who are rightly accused with something use the court system to silence criticism. And that is going to be the big, big concern. Public officials, it's going to be government, right? Public figures, and from a functional standpoint, there is no difference. In terms of what you can say about personal life of Tom Cruise and Joe Biden, that's exactly the same. The difference between an official and a figure is just elected office, control of government power. That's literally it. So private individuals who occupy positions of, I'm just going to read it. Private individuals who occupy positions of such persuasive power and influence that they are deemed a public figure for all purposes. There are very few of these in this country and in the world. There is no list The Supreme Court every year does not say the 2021 list of public figures that you can say whatever you want about their private life as long as you're not acting with actual malice. It's on a case-by-case basis. But some obvious ones are going to be somebody like LeBron James. LeBron James is famous not only for playing basketball, but also for his political activism or his taste in, actually, let me take Michael Jordan as a different thing. Does anybody really believe that Air Jordan is the most successful shoe brand in the history of the world because they just make the best basketball shoes? I'm sure that's part of it, right? But it's also a brand identity. You want to be like Mike, and it's very effective. And that comes not only from Michael Jordan's play on the basketball court, but also his general aura, right? The coolness that you associate with Michael Jordan, if you in fact do. Tom Cruise can endorse products. You get paid for it. And nobody cares what, and people are swayed by the endorsement because they like Tom Cruise the person, not necessarily Tom Cruise the actor. So I would say, I'm not going to try and do a number. Not every single NBA player is a public figure. Not every single actor is a public figure. It is going to be the ones that you see. A decent rule of thumb might be if them getting divorced is going to make the news in some way, shape, or form, chances are they're a public figure. Okay, now we have a limited purpose public figure. And this is someone who either voluntarily becomes a key figure in a particular controversy or is someone who reached prominence in one area, but whose celebrity has not reached an all-encompassing level. Okay? This is somebody who has voluntarily subjected themselves to public scrutiny, injected themselves into the public debate, and enjoys the benefits of that. Typically, these people are higher paid or enjoy positions of power or influence, but not all the time. And you really only associate them with one person. Now, I'm trying to think. So let's take the NBA example, right? We know the people who are going to be considered all-purpose public figures: the LeBron James, the Anthony Davises, the Russell Westbrook, right? The really big people who are making, $50 million a year. I can name 3 people on the Charlotte Hornets, maybe, and I'm fairly plugged in on sports. If the 6th man, if this, backup starting or the backup power forward for the Charlotte Hornets is walking down the street, I'm not picking him out of the lineup. I might be like, that dude's really tall. I don't know who that is. So the public has no interest in his private life. If he's cheating on his girlfriend, really cares. That has nothing to do with a public figure status. Now, if we're talking about his basketball play, yeah, he's a limited purpose public figure, right? He's getting paid to play basketball. He's being paid very handsomely to play basketball. We should be able to debate his role in a basketball game perfectly fine. So if I think that Charlotte Hornet is playing poorly because I heard from somebody that he was out in Vegas partying it up during a pandemic, that turns out to be false, he's going to have to prove actual malice against me because we're talking about his role as a basketball player. Sometimes these are close calls. Again, there are no hard and fast rules here, and oftentimes courts issue decisions and characterizations of people that I completely disagree with and I don't think are even logical, much less justifiable. But it is going to be really important as to which classification is mentioned here. Now, does anybody have any questions about that? Because this is going to be by far the most important thing about defamation that we learned, aside from maybe an opinion is not a fact, which you guys should know already. Cool. Okay, so Why do we treat these individuals differently? And then we also have private figures, okay? Private figures are people who are not famous for any particular purpose, don't wield any government power, don't enjoy any benefits of being out in the public eye. So why do we treat these people differently? There are three primary reasons. News reports about public figures are more newsworthy. If I say that the President of the United States is engaged in an extramarital affair, that is much bigger news than my neighbor Bob being engaged in an extramarital affair and me running that as the headline story of CNN. Because it doesn't affect people's lives. It doesn't affect public status. It doesn't affect any of that. Okay, second, public figures can fight back via their own pulpit. I say that the President of the United States is engaged in an extramarital affair. What's the President of the United States going to do? He's going to call a press conference and say, this is a lie. And here's all the reasons it's a lie. And he is able to effectively communicate his message to the population. And so when a news report and a public figure are engaged, there's at least equal footing, and an educated population can say, well, that person's lying, that person's lying. And we don't need to exact damages on one party or another to allow the population to make an educated choice. And again, always remember why we have defamation law. It's not just to punish lies. It's not just to punish mistakes even. It's there because we are trying to protect somebody's reputational interest. And if the President of the United States or another public figure or public official can effectively rebut a false accusation against them, then their reputation by and large remains intact and there are no damages. Or at least the damages are less. And so why should we allow somebody to sue when they haven't actually suffered any real legitimate harm? At least that's the theory. And finally, public figures enjoy some benefit of being in the public eye. Let's go back for a second, right? Most of the time, pretty much all the time, not only do these people voluntarily inject themselves into the public sphere, nobody accidentally becomes power forward for the Charlotte Hornets. Now, you might not like it, the fame that comes with it. You may think that it's a bad part of the job, but you understand that that's part of it when you sign up. Nobody accidentally gets cast in a movie. So there's a benefit. Sometimes it's monetary. I'd like to make NBA money. I'd like to make NBA money. I think like somebody who plays 4 minutes a night is still probably pulling down $2-3 million a year. Not a bad paycheck. Public officials get to wield power. People like wielding power. That's why people run for office. It sounds awful otherwise. Okay, so now, why is this important? Again, this is going to be like one of the more important things we learn about in the semester, so I'm going to keep going back to it as much as I possibly can. You need to show actual malice. That when if I am a public figure or a limited purpose public figure or a public official, and I say, what you said about me was false and defamatory, not only do I need to prove that it was false, but I need to prove that when you published it, that you did so with actual malice. And actual malice, first, you have to show one of these two things. This is an either-or kind of test. Either-or requirement here, okay? Number one, you have to show that it was done with knowledge of falsity. Yeah? Yeah, it's a good question. In the same way, and it makes sense, right? Couldn't just somebody get up on the stand and say, no, I'm actually very dumb, and I didn't know that it was false. It's the same way that we prove that somebody acted with malice aforethought in a murder, right? We can't literally go inside somebody's mind and find out that they meant to kill that person. But maybe the fact that they were sitting in a bush and they had a gun and they went like that and pulled the trigger, okay, that's pretty good evidence that they knew what they were doing and were intending to do it. And so you would use what is typical, I mean, it's evidence that is circumstantial, right? Circumstantial has this idea of, bad evidence. Circumstantial evidence is bad evidence, so that's not really the case. Let me give you an example. If I come to somebody, if somebody's about to run a story that the President of the United States is selling secrets to Iran, right? And the journal, and we can show through discovery, through evidence gathering, that the journalist was informed that it was false, knew that, maybe sent an email saying, I mean, sometimes they just send an email saying, I don't really care. This might be wrong, but I'm going to do it anyway. People are dumb and they admit stuff when they probably shouldn't. If you can also look at things like changing patterns of behavior. So, in reckless disregard, again, is the same thing, right? Either you know that it's false, or like you appreciated subjectively that it probably is false, but decided to run with it anyway. Let me give you an example. We have a good journalist, and good journalism means that you act objectively and you don't write stories about people you have a pre-existing relationship with, and you're not biased, and you triple check your sources and you fact check. And that's what this journalist does for every other case that he or she is involved in, right? And then for this case, they didn't fact check. They didn't call the person to try and get a quote. They didn't try and verify the source, and they were sloppy. Now, were they sloppy because they just were being sloppy that day? Or were they sloppy because they were, they knew it might be false, but we're going to go after it anyway? And that's what we'll see with the Rolling Stone case, is that it absolutely is subjective, and you don't need an admission, and they're just going to have to prove it through building blocks like that. But it is incredibly, incredibly difficult, which is why it's not impossible, but damn it, it's not hard to win a defamation case against a public figure, if you're a public figure in the United States. I hope that answered your question. Okay, good. I sometimes find that I talk for 3 minutes and then didn't actually answer anything. Okay, so. Oh, let me actually go back for a second. So, you need to prove this, as we talked about last class, with clear and convincing evidence. One of the other ways that it's a little bit easier to win a defamation case than it would, say, be to win a criminal case is in a criminal case, you got to show that somebody if you want to prove a murder case, you have to show that somebody intended to kill that person beyond a reasonable doubt. Something like a 98% chance, 99% chance. There's no hard fact, but it's an illustration, right? Clear and convincing evidence, it's not quite that high. Maybe 70%. So a jury does not need to find that it was absolutely the case that the journalist or the speaker or whomever subjectively understood that what they were saying was false or likely to be false, simply that it is far more likely than not that they appreciated it, which also makes it slightly easier because, again, when we're talking about defamation, we're not talking about criminal charges. We're talking about money. We're talking about injunctions. We're talking about civil damages, which are less of a liberty, less of an intrusion on liberty, and therefore requires less proof. Now, personally, I'd spend some time in jail before I had to pay a $5 million jury verdict, but that is at least the theory. Okay, so now we got a private individual, right? We look at these people, and they are not a public official. They haven't been elected or part of the government. They're not a public figure. They're not a limited purpose public figure. They are us. Unless you guys are famous for a reason that I am not familiar with, we are all going to be private figures. And the level of fault is negligence. So again, if we're talking about an issue, especially if it's not an issue of public concern, my neighbor Bob is cheating on his wife, right? I don't have a neighbor Bob, and if I did, I would not know if he's cheating on his wife. This is just an example. That has nothing to do with a public event. It has nothing to do with, has nothing to do with his public figure status, right? He's just a regular guy. If I publish that and it's false, then he simply needs to show that I acted with negligence. I didn't do my due diligence in research. I didn't do my due diligence and act reasonably to investigate whether or not my statement was true. And this action, this private figure suing for defamation, is very rarely going to be levied against a media group. Why? Because media groups don't typically run front page stories about My Neighbor Bob. If they're important enough to have a front page story or even any type of story, typically they're going to be a public figure, at least in some way, shape, or form. You know where you see this most often? Is social media. And it's a really interesting area of law that has been growing, because in the past, what avenues did we really have for libel between private figures? Like maybe somebody wrote a letter to somebody else. So you wrote a letter to a boss complaining about an employee, making false accusation against them, or again, I'm struggling to even think of a lot of examples. Here, social media has made this incredibly easy. There are people that I would consider private figures, like if anybody still has Facebook, you have those Facebook friends that have like 4,000 friends, and I'm like, how the heck do you know that many people? But if they make a false accusation against somebody else, they post it to Facebook, it's going to get 4,000 views. And so there are lawyers now that their entire business, or a substantial portion of their business, is suing or defending individuals for posts on social media. And the rationale for this is kind of the converse to what we see with public figures and public officials. Private individuals have very little impact on public policy or society. LeBron James, for better or for worse, has a massive impact on the cultural conversation in this country. Being able to discuss him as a person is important because his personality is driving public policy, public conversation, society in a way. My Neighbor Bob doesn't. Public or private figures do not have the same access to the media to rebut false or untrue accusations. And they don't get any benefit from it. They don't get power, they don't get money, they don't get status. They don't get the positives that come from being out in the public eye. And so therefore, why should we require them to bear the burden? Yeah. Sorry, this does not work. Sorry guys, give me a second. Okay, so this is not going to work. Neither is that. Apparently video clips are not working today on my laptop, which is very helpful. Sorry. Okay, so rather than rely on video clips, I'm just gonna talk about what happened. So former President Donald Trump is no longer president, but one of the big platforms of his presidential candidacy as well as his presidency was antithesis towards media, especially organized media. The New York Times, the Washington Post, CNN, even Fox News towards the end was not somebody that he was a particularly big fan of. And one of the things that he would say a lot during the presidential speech, during his speeches, as well as during cabinet meetings, and what I was going to do is show you a clip from one of his earlier cabinet meetings in 2016, was he was saying we're going to take a real strong look at our libel laws. We're going to make sure that those are opened up. We're going to make sure that it is easier for somebody to sue somebody else when he said at various points when it's false or knowingly false. And I am not here to be political, but one thing that I hope we can all agree on is that President Trump was never particularly consistent with his messaging. So we would say something like that, right? You can't make stuff up and then get money by printing outrageous lies. Now, first off, let's take the statement of you can't knowingly lie about somebody and get away with it, and that should be made illegal in the United States of America. What's the problem with that statement? Is it currently legal to, yeah, go ahead. Right, we definitely protect people for saying something accidentally, right? I'm gonna show you something, right? I'm gonna just go back. All the way back. I'll go back to it in a second, I promise. Okay. If I say something knowingly false about somebody else, and it's defamatory and it hurts their reputation, that's already illegal. So if he wants to campaign on a promise that he's going to make knowingly saying something false about somebody a civil offense in the United States of America, congratulations. That's been the case for 100 years. Okay, so that's number one. Now, what if he says that we want to open up the libel laws? We want to change the libel laws and make it easier. Swear to God, I don't need this right now. Sorry. It'll teach me. What if somebody so let's say President Trump is successful. And not only is he successful, but he also is successful in persuading his Republican and maybe even some Democratic legislatures to pass a law. And that law says, normally I'm much better about this than. A law that says everybody's looked under the negligence standard, right? Every statement, but no matter, we're going to get rid of that hierarchy between public figures, private individuals, and everybody's going to be a private figure. And if somebody says something false about somebody else, and they were negligent in doing so, that we win, right? What's the problem with that? And this is where it's really important to understand the structure of the government and how the idea of co-equal branches of government isn't strictly correct. Who decided that public figures enjoyed or that saying statements about public figures enjoyed special protection? Who made that call? What branch of government? Was it the executive, the legislative, or the judicial? When it's a Supreme Court case, it's going to be judicial. Can an act of Congress overrule, and actually, more importantly, it was the judicial branch saying the Constitution requires this stratification, this hierarchy. Can Congress overrule through legislation, a Supreme Court decision interpreting the Constitution? No. Because the Supreme Court is saying what the Constitution says. And if the Constitution and a law are inconsistent with each other, the Constitution wins. Because one of the first things that the Constitution says is it is the supreme law of the land. Now, you can say that is good, that is bad. Again, just because something is constitutional does not mean it is good. Just because something is unconstitutional does not mean it is bad. But it is the law. So, if Congress passed a law like that, it would get struck down as unconstitutional. So when President Trump said that he was going to open up the libel laws, what he really wanted to do was switch the Supreme Court. And in 4 years, he was able to appoint 3 Supreme Court justices, which is, I believe, the most of any president since Reagan. He got to do it in 4 years, just by coincidence and retirements and all these other things. Actually, I think 2 of them were deaths, and 1 of them was a retirement. And also, it doesn't seem to be an all that high priority because none of the Supreme Court justices that he appointed show any desire to overturn New York Times versus Sullivan, which is the case that gave us this stratification, gave us this hierarchy. Okay, so I do apologize for people who are watching online. My PowerPoint has decided it doesn't want to work, which is fine. Because from here on out, we're going to be talking about 2 cases, 2 things that I had you guys read over the 2 days. Now, I understand this is a difficult topic, okay? And I'm not trying to make light of it. But we, by and large, are not going to be talking about easy topics when we're talking about defamation. So, because I am not naive enough to think that every single person read all the reading with all of the attention to detail that I would like, I'm going to give you guys a kind of brief overview of this 2014 story. It was a Rolling Stone. It was in Rolling Stone magazine. And I'm going to bring this up so I can look at my notes. It was written by a journalist called Sabrina Elberly, and it was in November of 2014. And the crux, and it was an article that was looking at the problem of sexual assault and rape on college campuses and the ineffectiveness or inability or the difficulty, you can use any of those adjectives, I think, interchangeably, of prosecuting and preventing these types of crimes. And the quasi-judicial nature of university discipline, things like that. And the through line of this particular article was following a female student named Jackie. And Jackie, in great detail, described going to a fraternity party where she was drugged and then sexually assaulted by multiple members of the Kappa Psi fraternity. This was published. It was instantly one of the bigger stories in the country. There were protests at UVA. The fraternity was immediately suspended from UVA. And there were calls for the entire, there were calls for expulsions, there were calls for resignations. And one of the big parts of the one of the kind of more upsetting parts of the article is an account that Jackie gave to the journalist saying that she went to the dean of students, right, and complained, saying, I was raped at a college party. What are you going to do about it? Which is what a dean of students is supposed to be there for, right? To protect students. And she reports that she was, and Jackie says that Assistant Dean Nicola Ramo pressured Jackie to stay silent because, quote, nobody wants to go to the rape school. Which I think we are all in agreement. Saying that to even an alleged sexual assault victim is pretty terrible, especially when you're an associate dean of students. In the Rolling Stone version, Jackie also conveyed a story in which she confided in her friends about this rape happening, and her friends pressuring her not to report it and not to go to the hospital because they were afraid that they would not be invited to any future fraternity parties. That was the story. And part of the story, they also gave some specific details, right? This is when the party happened. She didn't name the guy who kind of led the sexual assault, but described him in general terms. Things like he was a lifeguard. Things like that. Questions began to emerge in the story after the police stated, actually that's backwards. Questions began to emerge based on details in Jackie's story. Most significantly, she described the leader as somebody who worked as a lifeguard at the local pool. There is nobody at that fraternity who is a lifeguard at the pool. And this was not something where Jackie told the reporter, this guy told me he was a lifeguard. The expectation was that Jackie knew who this person was and simply refused to reveal his identity because of justifiable fear of retribution, right? I don't know if Jackie made up her story. It seems likely that at least parts of it were fabricated. But we can understand that somebody who has been assaulted would be hesitant to out that person to a journalist for fear of retribution, right? So that's not inherently, it's not crazy, let me put it that way, okay? But there was no fraternity member who was a lifeguard. There was no party the night that Jackie said that she was assaulted. And as investigations began to pile up, additional things began to come out. Notably that Miss Ederle never attempted to contact not only the alleged perpetrator, but also her friends. The friends who in the article are alleged to have said, don't go to the hospital, don't go report this because we're afraid we won't be invited to frat parties, never contacted those friends. Never contacted the, contacted the fraternity to get a comment before running the story. And so there were enough details where the veracity of the story fell apart. And UVA left the article, and this is going to sound like a very, very minor detail, but it actually becomes incredibly important. Left the article up on their website with an explanation saying, we no longer have faith that this story is accurate. So a disclaimer in the article. Okay. That is the story itself. Now, there are going to be a lot of individuals, both human and non-human, actually, that are going to justifiably be upset and say that they were defamed by Miss Elderly's story. Can anybody name somebody who might, or something that might have had their reputational interest harmed by the existence of this story?
The Greek life.
Yeah, Aaron says the Greek life. So not only Drew, the guy who was the alleged perpetrator, but this was also a group activity, so anybody in that Greek. What else? So we have the Greek life. Anybody else in the Greek environment that might be liable or might be looking to sue? The individual fraternity. I forget what it was called. I never.
Pi Kappa Psi.
Phi Kappa Psi, right? Let's assume you're a halfway decent guy. Let's say you're not even a halfway decent guy. Not horrible. Are you going to pledge? And this story remains out there. Are you going to pledge to that particular fraternity? No. If you're a person looking to go to a frat party, are you going to a frat party at that particular fraternity? No. Does that harm their reputation? Yes. Now, the individual fraternity, are there other... Sorry. There we go. Are there other Phi Kappa Psi fraternities around the country? I think that's kind of the big purpose of Greek life. I wasn't in Greek life, but nothing against Greek life. It just wasn't a big part of my college experience. But there is it's called a fraternity, right? There's a networking obligation, there's a networking portion of that. Do you think that the national organization of Phi Kappa Psi is harmed by this article coming out? Yeah. Okay. How do you think this was done? This article came out November of 2014. I applied for college in November. I think probably most of you guys did too. That was kind of like the big thing. You'd apply in November, you find out in the early part of spring, and you decide where you want to go. You guys want to guess what happened to applications at UVA immediately after this article came out? They didn't go up. Because, as Dean Nicola Ramo is alleged to have said, nobody wants to go to the rape school. All right, so far we have the individual attacker. We got Drew. We got the other members of that fraternity. We got the fraternity itself. We got the national organization. We got UVA. If you are an associate dean of students, and you are quoted to have said to a sexual assault victim, don't report it because it'll harm the university, what does that do to your reputation? Is it good for your reputation or not good for your reputation? It is bad for your reputation. So, Dean Nicola Ramo, for 6. Okay, so we got all of these people who are potentially negatively impacted by the story, right? UVA cannot sue. Why? And let me give you something that might help. If it happened down the road at James Madison University, they could sue. So it's not the fact that it's a university, right? What's the difference between UVA and James Madison? UVA is public. It is a member of the government. You cannot defame UNCG. You can defame Guilford College. You can defame Greensboro College. And you can defame individuals at these universities. We'll see Dean Nicola Ramo sued and won. But the university itself cannot. If I am a member of well, actually, I'll put it this way. if I am not Drew, right, the individual who is accused of the actual assault, if I am another member of Phi Kappa Psi, can I sue? Theoretically, yes. However, we got to go back to our conversation about group libel here. Okay? Remember, when a statement is made about a group of individuals, the larger that group gets, the more difficult it is for somebody to sue based on the statement about the group. If it's a statement about a large group, such as a particular race or an occupation or a gender or even something as large as UNCG students, right? At a certain point, the group is too large where any statement about the group cannot logically apply to the individuals. An individual fraternity at UVA? Maybe. It's certainly small enough where it's a possibility, but you still got to prove that somebody who read the article would take what was said about the group in the article and apply it to the individual person. So that's kind of, oh, and also the friends can sue too, right? Theoretically. Because if you're a friend of somebody, you tell them not to go to the cops because you're worried it'll hurt your chances of getting into a frat party, that is also likely to hurt your reputation as well. Okay, so what happened? I'm really going to focus, and one of the things I don't like this story because, and I really don't, and one of the things that make defamation incredibly, incredibly hard is that somebody is getting screwed here. There is no best case scenario because either Jackie got some details wrong, which happens. We know enough about psychology now that if somebody mixes up dates or mixes up somebody's hair color, that it doesn't mean that they are lying about what happened to them, especially during a traumatic event. So either she's telling the truth and these people are getting away with a horrible crime, and Rolling Stone is having their reputation torpedoed and losing millions of dollars, or she was lying, or did make it up, or did fabricate elements of it. And Rolling Stone was complicit in that. And then I don't care how much money somebody gets, it's not going to make them whole for being falsely accused of rape. It'll help. And so that's kind of a difficult thing about, it's one of the many difficult things about this case, is that there are two possible sides here, and it means that somebody's getting screwed in either one of them. But what is interesting about the case is just how many different areas of defamation elements it hits. Who can sue? We have UVA that can't. We're looking at group libel, which deals with identification. We're looking at fault. We're looking at the idea that a corporation can sue. The corporation being the Greek life, the Greek fraternity. So with that, okay. So I'm going to focus just briefly on Dean Nicola Ramo. I'm going to walk you through how her lawsuit played out. Again, I'm going to pull up my notes on this one. In 2015, she filed a $7.5 million defamation suit. Now, is Dean Nicola Ramo an all-purpose public figure? Did you guys know who she was before this article? No, she's not. We also can agree that Rolling Stone was absolutely negligent in writing this story. They admitted as much in their retraction. They invited Columbia University's journalism school in to do a post-mortem investigation, and it is brutal. It is brutal. They essentially say that Rolling Stone failed to follow even the most basic journalistic principles in writing this article. They didn't fact-check sources. They were overly deferential to a primary source. They seemed more they kind of started with the proposition of sexual assault on college campuses is endemic. And this is a horrific story that illustrates that. And so they started with their result and worked backwards from there, which is not what you're supposed to do as a journalist. So they were negligent. But if she is a public figure, is negligence enough? And the answer is no. You got to show actual malice. And for all the terrible things that Sabrina Elderly did, and the editors at Rolling Stone, they were bad journalists. We might look at this case again when we get to media ethics. They were bad journalists. But they didn't know that she was lying. They made the mistake of believing an individual and being overly deferential to somebody they believe to be the victim of a horrific crime. That is not the same as subjectively understanding that what they were saying is false or that they recklessly disregarded the possibility that it was false. So this case was kind of supposed to come down to, is Dean Nicola Ramo a limited purpose public figure, or is she a private figure? She's a limited purpose public figure. She's going to lose because they're going to really not going to be able to show actual malice. Or is she going to be a private figure and she's going to win because they're going to be able to show negligence pretty darn easily. Everybody who was paying attention to this case going into that trial that's kind of where they were at. The answer is neither one of those things happened. So here's what ended up happening. Remember how I told you that Rolling Stone, they didn't take the article down entirely, but they did leave it up with an explanation saying that they did not believe that the article was still true. That's what ended up screwing them. The judge found that she was a limited purpose public figure, that Rolling Stone would need to have acted with actual malice for Nicola Ramo to win this case. And the jury found that when Rolling Stone wrote the article, when they published the article and it was sent out onto newsstands, that at that point they did not act with actual malice. Right? They were negligent as hell, but they did not act with actual malice. However, when you leave something up online, every second that you leave it online, and you know that you leave it online, you are publishing that thing anew. So at the time that the article was published, Rolling Stone did not know that what they were saying was false. We're all on the same page there. However, However, once they learned enough about it to know that it was probably false and left it up, even with that retraction, that's new publication. That's a new statement of fact. That's a new potentially defamatory article that's being published. And it was the leaving it up that allowed the jury to find Rolling Stone liable. And they found them liable in November of 2016 for $3 million in damages. They eventually settled for $1.65 million. $3 million. Then after that, they settled with Phi Kappa Psi for $1.65 million. and lawsuits by members of the fraternity is still working its way through the courts. Because it was dismissed, because the original lawsuit was dismissed because of the group libel problem, right? You can't say that the article mentioned you specifically when it didn't. That was overturned by the appeals courts, and as far as I know, is still active. I have not seen any news articles or any lawsuits or anything like that that have given me an update, so I believe it's still pending. This is why this stuff is really important. The decision to not take it down, but instead leave it up and print a retraction, cost Rolling Stone at least $4.65 million in damages, not including lawyers' fees. I don't care how good you are as a media organization, there aren't a lot of magazines that just have $4.65 million laying around. Okay, now again, because it is broken, I also want to briefly touch on the 2020 lawsuit, the lawsuit against Smartmatic, which is a elections, they essentially help run elections, right? They have elections machines, they help ensure election integrity. And they were the target of a lot of the, I'm going to call a spade, conspiracy theories that were floated after the 2020 election. There were accusations without evidence of, I'm talking specifically here about the accusations against the company that they, were working at the behest of Hugo Chavez in Venezuela, and that there were programs that would automatically take X number of Trump votes and turn them into X number of Biden votes. And by and large, these conspiracy theories were peddled by former New York Mayor Rudy Giuliani and attorneys Sidney Powell and Lynn Wood. And Smartmatic is suing them. That's fine. That's a pretty straightforward case. But who they are also suing, and I think it's going to be really interesting to see how it plays out, is they are also suing Fox News. Now, why would you sue Fox News in addition to Rudy Giuliani? Because they have a much stronger case against Rudy Giuliani than they have against Fox News. They don't have a bad case against Fox News, I don't think. I just think it's significantly closer. Why would you sue Fox News and not just go after the people you have a better chance of winning? Who has a lot of money? Fox News has a lot of money. I sue Sidney Powell for $2.7 billion. Am I getting, and I win, right? And I say that, man, she is terrible. She got it wrong. She knew she was getting it wrong. She was just soliciting donations. It was a one big grift, whatever you want to say about Sidney Powell. What you cannot say is she has $2.7 billion laying around in the bank. This is just lawyers going after the biggest paycheck, which is what you're supposed to do, right? You have the ability to make your client whole by going after the biggest fish in the pond. That's what you do. Because your job as a lawyer is to try and get the best possible result for your client. The case is going to come down to the culpability of those Fox News hosts. Lou Dobbs, what's her race? That judge, I don't remember. Anyway, when they hosted Sidney Powell and Rudy Giuliani on their network and gave them a platform, sometimes echoing those accusations as fact themselves, and at the very least not fact-checking or not pushing back against the accusations, were they operating with actual malice? And you can tell that these networks are scared. And this is simply a statement of fact, not a political opinion. You can tell that these networks are scared because after these were filed, they immediately started printing retractions. Immediately. Oh, well, there's no evidence that Smartmatic was responsible for changing the election. There is no evidence of widespread fraud or election or mistallying of votes by these companies. They're trying to protect themselves. They're trying to show that they weren't acting with actual malice and that they're good journalists. Whether it'll be successful, I don't know. I think it'll be really, really interesting. But I do think Smartmatic is going to have to show actual malice because they are a company engaged in the public interest business of running elections. So even though they're a small company, even though they're not human, they are probably going to be considered a limited purpose public figure. So with that, that is the end of class. That is the end of defamation. I will be posting your first legal analysis. It'll be due next week. I hope to post it tomorrow. We will see if I have power and the ability to do that. So it might be a little bit later, but I will be posting that as quickly as possible. Otherwise, I do appreciate you, and I hope you have a good day tomorrow. Class is canceled if you didn't see that, so congratulations on the day off.